They say, in the heart of northern Italy, there is a village that no longer appears on any map. It's called San Hermano. In the center of that village stood a small stone church, its bell tower leaning slightly to the left. The villagers believed the tower's bell had rung on its own for centuries, not to announce mass, but to warn of death. In the autumn of 1981, a history student named Marco arrived in the area to study the church's architecture. Locals told him not to stay past sunset. They said the last person who climbed the bell tower was never seen again. Marco didn't believe in curses. On his second evening he entered the church. The air smelled of damp wood and candle wax long extinguished. The ladder to the tower was old, each step groaning under his weight. Halfway up he heard the bell rope sway, though no wind was blowing. At the top he found the massive bell coated in dust. He reached out, touched the edge, and felt it vibrate softly under his fingers. Suddenly a deep, resonant sound shook the air. Bong and Marco dropped his flashlight. The beam rolled across the floorboards and illuminated something in the corner. A pair of shoes. Inside them, the bones of feet, still wearing rotted socks. Marco backed away, but the trapdoor he had come through was now closed. From the shadows, a voice dry, like wind through leaves, whispered in Italian, "The bell is never rung for the living." The next morning, the church was locked, and Marco's rented bicycle was still leaning against the wall. He was never found. Some nights, people in nearby towns swear they hear the distant toll of a bell. And if you count the rings, they say, you'll know exactly how many days you have left. Winter 1992. A small town on the border of Germany and the Czech Republic called Winterhafen lay under a constant blanket of fog. At the very end of the main street stood a house people called Haus Grau, the Grey House. Its previous owner, an old man who lived alone, had vanished without a trace 3 years earlier. Since then, the house had stood empty, or at least that's what everyone thought. Christina, a 7-year-old nurse, had just moved to town and couldn't find an apartment. The estate agent insisted she take the Grey House. The rent was so cheap she couldn't say no. On her first day, everything seemed normal, except that, returning from the market, she could swear she saw a shadow from an upstairs window, a hand pulling the curtain aside. But the house had only one floor. At night, the fog curled around the house like a living thing. At 2 in the morning, she heard a faint scratching at her bedroom window. When she finally gathered the courage to pull back the curtain, no one was there, only the cloud of her own breath on the glass. On the third night, the power went out for a few minutes. In the dark, the reflections in the window had changed. She didn't see herself, but the face of an old man, mouth slightly open, staring directly at her. The next morning, the police came, asking about screams that neighbors claimed to have heard in the night. Christina said she hadn't heard anything, but she didn't tell them the truth that the last thing she saw before fainting was the same old man, standing right behind her, inside the mirror. The Grey House still stands, and they say if you look at its windows in the winter fog, you might see a curtain shift, even though the house has been locked for years. They say some houses are not built, they are born. In the winter of 1974, in the outskirts of a small village in Poland, an old stone house marked number 67 was put up for sale. The price was laughably low, almost 1/10 of its real value. Everyone knew the reason, but no one was willing to say it out loud. A young couple, Anna and Mariusz, newly married, decided not to miss the opportunity. The house was made of stone with a slanted roof and narrow windows. The only problem was, the neighbors kept their distance. Even when Anna tried to greet them on the first day, an old woman standing at the door across the street simply made the sign of the cross and shut her door. The first night, a cold wind blew through the cracks in the windows. Anna, washing dishes in the kitchen, heard faint footsteps upstairs. Mariusz wasn't home, and the house had no upstairs. She thought it might be the pipes, and dismissed it. The second night, at exactly 3 in the morning, Mariusz woke to the sound of the front door opening and then closing. When he went downstairs, the door was locked, but wet footprints trailed across the carpet to the center of the living room and stopped there. On the third day, the power went out for a few minutes. Anna lit a candle and noticed a shadow moving across the wall, a shadow that belonged to neither of them. But the night everything ended was Sunday. They had a guest, Anna's brother. During dinner, they heard slow knocking from the basement. Her brother insisted they go and check. The basement smelled of dampness and rusted iron. When they shined the flashlight on the wall, they saw words written in charcoal. "You will leave like the others." The next morning, neighbors saw that house number 67 was empty again. There was no sign of Anna or Mariusz. The police found nothing, except the same wet footprints, leading to the center of the living room and ending there. They say that even now, if you stand outside that house at night, you can hear footsteps from somewhere that should not exist.